got this lovely gender-affirming candle I ordered myself for the new year. Maybe I should make a video about gender. Maybe I'll just go check out what's been on YouTube the last couple of days. Oh. Well, I guess there's just something in the air. Hello and welcome. I'm Zilla, and this is my Athenaeum. Today I want to discuss gender. What the heck is it, and why is it so controversial? People like to use the word gender as if it's synonymous with sex, and as if both are a strict binary. But neither of those things is actually true. It's something that I personally have struggled with for all of my life. I have a feminine-shaped body, I have a rather femme presentation, and people treat me as a woman, but I've never, ever felt right identifying as such. When I first encountered the word agender, sometimes also called genderless, it was like a light going off in a shadowy corner of my soul. This is what I am. I'm not alone. There's a word for people like me, people who don't even know what it feels like to have a gender. That's right, I have no gender at all. I have no intuitive understanding of what it means to have a gender or identify with one. I feel like all attempts to gender me in any way are limiting, frustrating, and what's more, I've always felt that way. When I try to conceptualize gender, I find myself coming back to Vihart's video on the subject.
When I was younger, I really could not understand why people made a big deal of gender at all. Why would anyone ever feel the need to point out that they were a man or a woman? I thought it silly and attention-seeking when anyone would call attention to their gender in any way.
Like Vihart, I don't, to this day, really understand what gender feels like. And because of this, it took me a long time to come around to really empathizing with people who need to transition. I sympathized, sure, but I couldn't understand why anyone would want to fight the fights that so many trans people have to in order to feel or be perceived as a man or a woman or gender fluid or whichever, when gender just didn't matter. Just because I don't have an internal sense of gender doesn't mean that other people don't. It doesn't mean that gender isn't real, and that it doesn't cause serious imbalance in people's lives when they feel like it's a mismatch with how they're treated and perceived.
Indeed, gender is a thing. Maybe it's culturally created, or maybe it's biological, or maybe it's something else, I don't know, but it's definitely real. And if it's real when trans folk do it, maybe it's even real when cis folk do it. In understanding that gender identity is a real thing, I also understood that I don't have it.
Let's put some science on the table. The most common confusion that people have is about sexual characteristics and gender. Surely, they might say, if you have female genitalia, then you are a woman. And if you have male genitalia, then you are a man. And that's all there is to it, right? But the biology just doesn't work that way. Many babies are born whose genitalia do not fall cleanly into either category. This is called intersex. Unfortunately, many intersex babies have their genitalia plastic surgeried into a more acceptable form, obviously non-consensually. Because surely they can't just exist that way. And that's before you get into the cases like the famous nun whose testicles dropped when she was well into adulthood, or the men who develop breasts later in life. Some people will then try to say, well, okay, what about genetics? We know that XX chromosomes means woman and XY means man, right? Also, no. You can be XY with female external characteristics, or XX with male external characteristics, not to mention cases of XXX or XXY. But surely then there must be hormones or brain differences or some other physiological basis for gender, right? It's a strict binary. Well, I'm afraid not. Male and female are just the two most heavily populated plot points on a full spectrum and their surrounding areas. There's a lot else to go around. So if it's not biological, what is gender? In practical terms, it's how you identify with the gender spectrum. If you can think to yourself comfortably and sincerely, I am a man, there you are. And if you can think to yourself comfortably and sincerely, I am a woman, there you are. And if you think to yourself comfortably, I am both, or neither, or something else entirely, well, there you are. Go ahead and try on these statements. Even if it turns out that you are exactly as you have always assumed you would be, what harm is there in asking? In fact, it might do you a lot of good. Even if you turn out to identify the same way you always have, being more secure in that identity can help you cope with situations that either come into conflict or reaffirm that identity. There are plenty of things besides biology that can factor into your gender identity or be affected by it. For instance, let's talk about your presentation, or the way that you present yourself to the world. A man can absolutely wear makeup. A woman can absolutely wear a suit. Just because the spectrum of presentation tends to be named the same thing as the spectrum of genders does not mean that your place along it has to be the same. Personally, I tend to use the Futch presentation scale. From femme on one end, which is to say makeup, dresses, heels, curves, and on the other end, butch. Practical, straight lines, pockets, pants. Thus, my statement that I tend to present somewhat femme, as you see. There is also the difficulty of romantic and sexual orientation when people's gender may not be as straightforward as it at first seems. How can I, for instance, a genderless person, call myself straight? What does heterosexual even mean when I have none? I tend to use it as a shorthand, but it can be somewhat complicated. One of the world's foremost feminist scholars, Judith Butler, has proposed the theory that gender is more accurately seen as performance, a role rather than an identity, a part of your being, a way of interacting with social expectations and norms. The performance and identity models of gender come into conflict around the edges. Is gender an inherent, immutable quality that influences how we adapt to our society's norms? Or is our gender identity chosen by the societal and cultural expectations that we feel comfort with? This may be a bit chicken and egg for our purposes, but it's good to realize that not even the scholars can agree on everything here. Gender, like many abstract concepts, is hard to pin down, but that doesn't make it less real, or less important for the people who experience it. When most people think about transness, probably they think mostly about dysphoria. Imagine the horror of knowing with deep certainty that you are a man, but waking up every morning and looking in the mirror to see your body just the wrong shape, almost like it isn't really you. And then, even if you do go through every possible step, gender reassignment surgery, hormone replacement therapy, the unexpectedly onerous process of changing your name and sex marker on official documents, buying an entirely new wardrobe and other needlessly gendered products, you go through all of that and a random store clerk might still just call you ma'am. It's no wonder that dysphoria can lead to depression, self-hatred, and even suicide. But you don't have to have dysphoria to be trans, and you don't have to be trans for gender to be important to you. On a similarly negative note, most, if not all, societies have traditional and ingrained gender roles, and if you present or are perceived as one, but act outside of those boundaries, well, that can get you anything from ridicule to shame to serious endangerment. This is especially true in societies where one gender is considered superior to another. In America, it's understood that everybody who wants to get ahead in life would act like a man. You have to be tough, aggressive, relentless. You have no time for softness or romance. You have to pursue wealth and power. Oh, and if you're a woman, get used to everyone hating you. But if you act like a woman, and you're a man, well, then you're a crybaby, a pushover, a wimp, a sissy. This is what we call toxic masculinity. There are so many other ways to be. Women need not be gentle and nurturing, and men need not be hard and materialistic. Masculinity does not have to be toxic, and indeed, it is not always so. But gender identity isn't just about the negatives. The opposite of gender dysphoria is gender euphoria. And anyone can have that. All you have to do is know what gender you are and do things that feed that feeling. Maybe it's some object that reinforces who you are. Maybe all of those needlessly gendered items actually feel like freedom. Maybe having a store clerk thoughtlessly refer to you as sir is a moment of joyous triumph. Why not revel in that part of ourselves? Have you ever put on a piece of clothing and it just fit perfectly? Or heard a piece of music that just spoke to your soul? Well, you can do that with gender too. No matter what your gender or lack thereof, it will always feel good to find things that align with that part of your identity. If you're gender fluid, that might be having multiple wardrobes or body-modifying clothing that can help you adjust to how you feel that day. If you're a butch man, it might be hearing people call you tough guy or strong man. If you're a feminine woman, you might find that the best thing in the world to make you feel like a woman is to blast Shania Twain and have a bath bomb all by yourself. And that is great. You should do whatever it is that makes you feel the most you. And better still, there is absolutely no reason that you can't reassess and reevaluate your gender identity and preferences over time. Everybody grows and changes, and checking in with yourself can be a great way to find some personal affirmation. Language and usage change over time and more quickly than you might think. The kids these days have been using language in a way that you wouldn't have heard back in my day, for as long as we've had recorded history, at least. One of the biggest barriers to the acceptance of the gender experience as valid, mutable, and expansive is the perception of newfangledness. People hear terms they didn't grow up with, like non-binary or dead naming, and they seem unreal. All of the new etiquette about how to support trans and non-binary folk, it just seems tacked on and attention-seeking. But the truth is that all of these experiences have always been around. It's just that society hasn't caught up. So let's run through a quick FAQ on how to talk about, and how not to talk about, gender. Since the English language and so many others rely on gendered personal pronouns, someone's gender can regularly be affirmed or undermined by the way that other people refer to them. Now, I want to draw your attention to the fact that I just used the pronoun them for any one. None of you batted an eye, did you? That's because we've had singular they in common usage in the English language since at least the 1400s. It's just not been used for defined persons. That's what makes it such a natural choice for people wanting to move away from gendered terminology. Singular they refers to just one individual, but the verb usage does stay in the plural. That's because we have been using it this way for most of a millennium, and at this point, changing it further is just kind of overthinking it. But some people want further distinction, and that's understandable if they like clarity in their linguistic changes. That's where you start getting new pronouns, like Z here. And someone's pronouns really aren't a preference. Preference implies that it's not that important, and that's more leeway than most people's gender identity can comfortably swallow. For me, with no gender, well, sure, I prefer she or they, but if you called me Z or even he, I probably wouldn't care. However, try calling a big burly butch man she, and you'll probably see instantly just how discomforting misgendering someone can be. Since no one can intuit your pronouns just by looking at how you present, that means that the easiest way to linguistically adapt is to start including them when you introduce yourself. Even, perhaps especially, if you're cis. You'll notice pronouns in my bio. I also use them in everything from my Twitter account, to my Zoom chats, to my syllabi. Introducing yourself this way does mean paying attention to yet another piece of information. If somebody provides you with their pronouns, you should respect that. If someone changes the name or pronouns that they find acceptable in reference to themselves, you should use those always for them, even in the past. Abigail Thorne just made a big splash on the internet with her coming out video. I've really loved her work for the last 7 years. Elliot Page is an amazing actor. I've thought so ever since I first saw him in Juno. Using someone's old identity, if they haven't explicitly told you they can, is known as dead naming. That may initially sound harsh, but think about how it would feel. If someone has gone through potentially years of self-searching and hard work to make this change so that they can feel better and more themselves, it's gotta feel pretty awful that you won't give them the same courtesy you'd give to a married woman. It is especially bad if you reveal their trans status to people who don't know. This is called outing, and it can get people killed. I'm not exaggerating. Trans folk are murdered at an alarming rate, trans women of color especially. It can also lead to a loss of job or housing. According to the National Center for Trans Equality, 1 in 5 trans people will experience homelessness in their lives. Don't ever assume that someone has told their family, their coworkers, even some of their friends, unless they tell you so themselves. You may have noticed me using the word trans or transgender throughout this video. The terminology there has particularly shifted quite a bit. There was a time when transgender was used as a verb, and when the term for a trans person was trans star. There was even a time when certain slurs were the commonplace and non-derogatory terms. These are all outdated, but it's not a bad reflection on you if you didn't know that. Now you know, so please stop using them. There are plenty of terrible ways that people refer to trans folk, and I'm not going to go through a list of slurs. You can look that up on your own, it's the internet. But if you want to learn more about how trans people and other people with gender, sexuality, and romantic orientations different than what you may be used to refer to themselves, I highly recommend Ash Hardell's ABCs of LGBT+. It's a great series. Speaking of slurs, let me tell you what is not one. Let's start with cisgender. As a Latin teacher myself, I can tell you that cis is merely the opposite preposition from trans. Trans meaning over, or across, or on the far side, and cis meaning near, or on this side, or the same. It's perfectly normal when talking about gender to distinguish between cis and trans. That idea that this is an attack of some kind comes from people feeling threatened that while they may be the majority, they aren't the default. Another term that gets disingenuously called derogatory is TERF, or trans-exclusionary radical feminist. Whether they're feminist is up for debate. But the central point of their ideology is that sex and gender are biological, and no man can ever become a woman. Now, we've blown the biology argument out of the water already. This is blatantly not the case. But to a certain type of woman who's been steeped in the fear of gendered violence, it can seem, without knowing more, that trans women are men invading their safe spaces, and that trans men are just deluded children. It's also a community that reeks oddly of cultish behavior. Members are groomed into it, love-bombed when they take TERF stances, and isolated from anyone who might disagree with them. It also dovetails quite neatly with right-wing ideology on gender essentialism and the casting of outgroups as threats. TERFism is extremely tragic and dangerous, but TERF still isn't a slur. As I was beginning to film this video, ContraPoints came out with an amazing video on just this topic, so if you want to know more, go watch it here. The truth is that just like liberals aren't coming for your guns, and gay folks aren't coming for your marriage, trans people aren't coming for women, feminism, or lesbians. They're just another marginalized group, hoping for a safe place to exist. So what can you do to protect all genders so that the world is safe for everybody? Well, there are lots of activist activities that you can take up. You can donate to trans charities and protest against anti-trans bills. You can work against homelessness and donate your time to fighting gendered violence. But there are also these simple daily courtesies and rules of etiquette that you can follow in your daily life. Respect somebody's pronouns and name. It's totally normal to mess up once in a while, especially if something has changed. But if you notice it, you should stop and correct yourself. Say, oops. And if somebody corrects you, you should say thank you. It's not normal to draw attention to it by refusing to correct yourself or by spending long minutes profusely apologizing. Trans people spend a lot of their lives under scrutiny, and if you don't make a big deal of it, they'll feel safer around you. If somebody uses a term you don't understand, or describes an experience you can't relate to, it's okay to ask for information, but you must accept that it's not their job to educate you, and don't wail and moan about how things were different in your day. Some good examples might be saying, "Oh, what does AFAB mean?" Or, "Do you happen to know where I can read more about non-surgical transition?" Don't make assumptions about what somebody else needs to feel euphoric about their gender, and don't ask invasive questions unless the topic has already come up. Would you ask a cis person this in this circumstance? No? Then don't. Also, just know that "I never would have guessed" is never a compliment. And you can start to adjust your language. Ladies and gentlemen, how about distinguished guests? You can use this kind of inclusive language to replace all sorts of gendered phrases. And you never know when you might just help out somebody by having an ungendered restroom, without implying that non-binary people are aliens. Gender can't be understood simply. There is no binary, no intrinsic biology, no absolute. And this complexity goes back as far as human records show, to all corners of human experience, taking innumerable forms. But rather than finding this frightening, we can choose to find this beautiful. The diversity of human experience is open to us through the medium of compassion, communication, and curiosity. There's a reason the LGBTQ+ community is best represented by a rainbow. It's glorious, it's natural, it's awe-inspiring, and it encompasses all the light our eyes can see. Keep learning, friends.